Are condemning the military coup in Myanmar, calling for a quick restoration of democracy. The US is warning it'll reimpose sanctions. The military has justified the power grab by alleging fraud in the November elections that Aung San Suu Kyi's party won. She's been arrested and has called on her supporters not to accept the situation. Yesterday's coup ended a decade of transition from outright military rule. So let's discuss this further. We're joined by Shabnam Mayet, a human rights activist and expert on Myanmar. Very good morning to you. Tell us what you are hearing about the situation on the ground and how concerned are you for the safety of Aung San Suu Kyi and other politicians who are arrested?
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. The situation is pretty dire. I mean, if you think about how it happened, early Monday morning, all flights have been cancelled, domestic, international, ATMs are closed, all communication, TV, radio, the internet, everything has gone down for the most part, and people have been arrested, from ministers, the president, Aung San Suu Kyi herself, activists, members of the media, and ministers across all regions. I mean, the country is coming from a 50-year rule by military junta, and the citizens remember all too well, how problematic that was and how challenging that was for them, with a crackdown on any free speech. And of course, some of the longest civil wars in the world are being fought by the Myanmar military with minorities along practically every border.
I just wonder why the military had to go this route. I mean, even though Aung San Suu Kyi was in power, the military was still calling the shots.
Exactly. The 2008 constitution ensured that they had 25% of the seats. They head up the big conglomerates in the country. It's, they have leadership. And of course, they have perpetrated a genocide in 2017. And General Min Aung Hlaing, the current commander-in-chief, head of the military, who is now head of the country, was the person or the architect of the Rohingya genocide. So the situation is pretty dire.
Yeah, and you wonder what the concern was as far as Aung San Suu Kyi, her position in power, because she did absolutely nothing for the Rohingyas. I mean, the massacre against them continued. They are landless and powerless. So I'm not sure why they thought she would be standing in the way of any of their rights.
You're so right. In fact, last year at the ICJ, she defended the military's actions in the genocide. So she's been playing a really good game with the military. Of course, what this shows us is that this whole movement to democracy has in fact been a farce, and the military is showing their power, which they've always held.
I mean, it really makes you feel sick about what's going to happen to the Rohingyas, because you know that it can get worse. They are not wanted in that country, certainly under the military. We now hear that the United States is threatening sanctions. Will that make a difference?
So Min Aung Hlaing and 3 other heads of the military have been sanctioned in 2019 by the US. I don't think it's making a huge difference, because Myanmar has been open for trade and it's pretty rich in resources. And one of the major trading partners, of course, is China right next door. And so I think the world is going to have to put a bit of a hard line out there. We have to talk arms embargoes, proper targeted sanctions, and a return, because this was a proper election. It was a democratic election, despite what the military says. Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the NLD, won in a landslide victory of more than 83% of the vote. So there's no reason that they should be questioned. And according to the Electoral Commission, everything was fine, because the irregularities were too small to warrant a real concern. And so the world is going to have to put some real practical steps out there. Condemnation is just not going to be enough right now.
Yeah, and are they going to do that? I mean, we've seen these horrific pictures of the massacre of the Rohingyas, and yet, sanctions slapped on a few people really hasn't made any difference at all. So, I mean, what realistically can be done, and who will be the driver?
Well, today the United Nations Security Council is meeting in a closed-door meeting to speak about the situation and the threat to peace and stability in the region. They want to look at working with partners, but of course we know the ASEAN has been pretty useless in terms of interfering even during the genocide. And it's not just the Rohingya, right? Because the Arakan army is fighting in Rakhine State, as well as other rebel forces are fighting the military, because the military has had a terrible, brutal, perpetrating these terrible, brutal actions across minorities. And we're talking around 135 minorities in the country. They're looking at the Burmanization of the country, right? This nationalist project, and it's going to be really scary going ahead. Citizens, of course, already stockpiling, and the situation is just not looking good.
Oh, it really is terrible. Shabnam Mayet, very good to talk to you, and thanks for updating us on that.